years after Bram Stoker penned a gothic horror novel that introduced Count Dracula to the world, California police were contemplating a gruesome and twisted case that would lead to Richard Trenton Chase being labeled the Vampire of Sacramento. Like the Count in Stoker's novel, Chase had a lust for blood. But the terror of Dracula's fiction was no match for the reality of Richard Chase, whose depravity would include rape, murder, mutilation, cannibalism, and necrophilia.
According to Richard Chase, it was all about the blood. This case didn't follow any particular pattern other than being very brazen, committing his crimes whenever he felt the need to.
Ray Biondi was a detective with the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department, investigating a series of murders that had shocked both the community and those working to unravel the crimes.
We had a murder where a man was taking groceries from his car to his front door and he was shot. Didn't seem to be related to anything. We didn't have an idea why. This man was an engineer for the state of California. I had no enemies.
The engineer was 51-year-old Ambrose Griffin. His wife had initially assumed her husband had suffered a heart attack. To her horror, he had been shot and killed for no apparent reason. It was December 29, 1977, and Richard Chase had committed murder for the first time.
Why he shot the man carrying groceries out of his car is still not very clear, other than he was just want to shoot at somebody. He also shot at a neighbor's house in that particular area, and later the slug was actually found in a kitchen cabinet. Missed the lady, we think it went through the bun in her hair. But yeah, he was walking around in neighborhoods, saw a house, and decided he was going to go in, and that was it. He didn't know who was in the house or had not cased the place out. Just spur of the moment, do it now, and referred to as a blitz attack. You don't know what's coming, it just happens.
Much worse was to follow a few weeks later, when in January 1978, Teresa Wallen was attacked and killed in her own home.
In the same general area, same suburban part of Sacramento County, we had what was really a horrific murder. Someone had entered a house, killed the resident there, was Teresa Wallen, we later learned was pregnant. And apparently it was described as a blitz attack. It was during the day, probably around noontime, a very unusual time. But this person went in there, shot her, drug her to a back bedroom, eviscerated her. That was the early part of that week in January. Later on that Friday, we were called to a house on Marywood, which is, again, in the same general suburban area near a couple of very large shopping centers. But in that house, there was Evelyn Maroth and her 6-year-old son and 2-year-old baby and an older gentleman who was a friend, and they were getting ready to go up to the mountains to play in the snow. And they were supposed to leave by 10 o'clock in the day. So again, we having this horrific activity in the middle of the day. Someone went in the house, murdered Evelyn, murdered her 6-year-old son. The baby's crib showed evidence that the baby was probably murdered in the crib, but the baby was gone. The older gentleman who was a visitor, he was found in the living room. He had been murdered also. So now we knew these cases were now getting tied together because Evelyn was basically in the same shape as Teresa Wallen, and that she had been eviscerated and things done to her. At one point, we saw there were like a pattern of ringlets on the floor in blood. At the time, that went right over my head. I didn't recognize what it was. Later, we determined what this person was doing was drinking the blood, and that was from a cup that he had left there. It was probably one of those, oh my God, what am I doing here moments. When I went into Maroth house, because in the bedroom was a 6-year-old, all dressed up in brand new clothes to go to the snow. And at the time, I had a 6-year-old son. And that was kind of hard. That one was really emotional for me.
Richard Trenton Chase was born into a disciplinarian and dysfunctional family in Santa Clara County on May 23, 1950. He lived with a younger sister and his parents, whose relationship was marked by confrontation and aggression. By the time he reached his teenage years, he was a heavy drinker and had started taking drugs. There were early signs that all was not well inside the mind of the young man when he started killing and mutilating animals. During high school, his mental instability became more prevalent, and by the time he had joined American River College, he had sought help through appointments with a psychiatrist. But his drinking and drug use continued, and as his mental condition worsened, a series of roommates noted his weird behavior, which included hypochondria and appearing naked in front of others.
He was an okay student, and later in high school, then he got in heavily into either marijuana or some other kind of drugs. He got very weird. But yeah, his family acknowledged that he had some real mental issues all the time.
Living on his own, Richard Chase again turned to killing animals and eating their raw flesh and guts. He claimed this was because his heart was shrinking and that ingesting blood was the only way he could survive. In 1973, he was admitted to a psychiatric ward after presenting at American River Hospital claiming his pulmonary artery had been stolen and his blood flow had stopped. 3 years later, he was admitted to hospital with blood poisoning after injecting himself with rabbit blood. He was committed to Beverly Manor Psychiatric Hospital, where staff privately referred to him as Dracula. During his stay, he was also found with 2 dead birds and blood around his mouth. After being treated with psychoactive drugs, he was released in 1976 and was not considered to be a danger to the public.
In fact, he had been in a mental facility here in Sacramento and had escaped prior to this. He had been picked up by Pyramid Lake up in Nevada, running around naked along the beach, and the Indian police there finally caught him, went and determined that he had actually killed a cow and smelled it, and he had blood all over him at the time. He was doing a lot of psychotic things. He should have never been released from or able to escape from the facility he was in.
He continued to source animals, including cats and dogs from the local neighborhood, to kill, disembowel, and eat. He even used a blender to liquefy animal matter and consumed it as a drink. In his delusional state, Chase also claimed Nazis were trying to poison him and turn his blood to dust. In the winter of 1977-78, his thirst for blood caught the attention of the FBI following the discovery of Teresa Wallen's mutilated body. Pioneering psychological profiler Robert Ressler was called in to compile a profile of the likely killer. In his assessment, Wallen's attacker would be a loner, unclean, malnourished, and likely to kill again. Within 3 days, those fears were confirmed, with the discovery of the bodies at the Miroth household.
In the Wallen house, the door was unlocked. And what we think was happening, she was in the process of moving her garbage to the front and left the door unlocked. She was ready to take the garbage cans out. In the Miroth house, there was comings and going because her friend was going to go rent some skis or snow equipment. And so he pulled up and the garage door was open and the back door, the door between the kitchen and the garage was unlocked because they were coming and going, getting ready to leave to go to the snow.
Chase would later tell the FBI agents he chose his victims simply by trying the door handle at their house. A locked door meant he was not welcome.
We had put a sketch out about this suspicious individual who committed a couple burglaries in the neighborhood where Teresa Wallen was murdered and was also seen going door to door in the same area. So we had kind of a suspect of this suspicious individual. Nancy Holland was a person shopping in a market behind the Teresa Wallen house where it butted up to a shopping center. She came across this individual who was later determined to be Richard Chase. At first didn't recognize him because of his drawn out, apparently drugged out looking condition. And she was very scared of him. When she went home, her father-in-law had a picture of our poster or sketch that we had publicized. And she said, that looks a lot like Richard Chase. So on Friday we had these murders. She came forth on a Saturday. We did a lot of work. We identified who this Richard Chase was, that he had been arrested previous and all that. And from there, it went rather rapid. We had all these murders, but on that Saturday, he was actually under arrest. They went to his apartment. He tried to flee. The detectives tackled him. He was carrying a box that had the gun in there that eventually matched the bullets from the different victims. What was missing was the baby's body, but there was some evidence in the box that the baby's body had probably been there. And it was several weeks later it was found where it had been disposed of behind a shopping center. That case got solved because we made a sketch, somebody recognized the sketch, we were banging on doors, found the right door and arrested the guy.
In the space of just 6 days, Richard Chase had killed Teresa Wallen, Evelyn Miroth, her 6-year-old son Jason, her 22-month-old nephew David Ferreira, and her adult friend Dan Meredith. Soon after, detectives had apprehended Chase at his home, which was splattered with blood and strewn with animal parts. Lieutenant Biondi had his first interaction with the killer.
Somebody was to tell me, this is what a serial killer looks like, I'd agree. I mean, here was a guy who had long hair, he was hygienically unkept, blood-stained clothes. The clothes he had on were blood-stained all the way to his feet. He had this holster and a gun belt that he was wearing that he really seemed to treasure. Because at one point we weren't getting anywhere with him in the interview, so I went in and I took his holster and belt away from him, and I was sitting there stroking the leather, and that really upset him. I think that was his security blanket. He really didn't acknowledge everything that he had done. He was obviously to me he was very psychotic, but he knew what he was doing, definitely. So we were trying to get him to acknowledge everything he did about the puppies and the cats and the dogs, and why did he have all these animal and maybe human parts in his apartment. What was he doing? What was he trying to accomplish? And I don't remember that we got any really good detail out of him, because he was, I guess with a better word, kind of just spaced out about it.
During questioning, police started to understand more about the warped mind of Richard Chase.
Generally in homicides, we don't really know the why, because most confessions are self-serving in some way or another, trying to cover their own person who did it. But what actually happened? How did he go to all these places in the daylight, was able to go in these houses and was never spotted? And that was what was really questioning to me. I mean, I couldn't understand how he was able to, he wasn't sneaking around at night, he was during the daytime. Even in the Marywood murders, previous to that, he was going door to door trying to sell some magazines, and people were slamming the door as soon as they saw him, because his appearance would scare you just to look at him.
Richard Chase confessed to his crimes, although he claimed to have a failing memory of the exact details. The prosecution laid out the depths of his depravity, including details of the rape and mutilation of Teresa Wallen and Evelyn Miroth. The jury also heard of the decapitation of Evelyn's nephew David, parts of whom Chase is alleged to have eaten. The defense entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, but in January 1979, Richard Chase stood in the dock in Santa Clara County Court, charged with 6 counts of first-degree murder.
I testified. Yeah, we had how to venue a trial that went down to the Bay Area. Mostly it was the psychologists and the crime lab people and the prosecutor, Ronald Talkman, who did a great job and acknowledged the fact that, yes, this guy is really weird, has all kinds of mental issues and all that, but he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew that he wanted to escape and get away from the police. So he knew he was doing wrong all the time. And I guess it came out that he felt that he had all these diseases and was sick, and he was drinking blood to try to remedy that.
After a 4-month trial and just a few hours of deliberation, the jury found Richard Chase guilty on all 6 counts of murder. He was sentenced to death and sent to San Quentin prison. It is claimed that even during his sentence he put fear into fellow inmates, who kept their distance. In the end, the state was not required to take Chase's life. On Boxing Day 1980, the Vampire of Sacramento, Richard Trenton Chase, was found dead in his prison cell from an overdose of antidepressants.
About 4 days after Stafford was executed, I received in the mail a $5 gift certificate from the to the Sirloin Stockade, signed Roger Dale Stafford. And on the back, he writes something like, "Hey, you got away with it. You murdered me." And he misspells a lot of things. You knew I was innocent. And of course, I knew he wasn't innocent.
Roger Dale Stafford was a self-described con artist, an abusive father, and a mass murderer, responsible for what would be the worst killings in the state of Oklahoma for nearly 20 years. Born in November 1946 in Alabama, Stafford retained a close relationship with his brother Harold, one of many siblings. He married Verna Ray Monk, and together they had 3 children. Constantly struggling for money, Roger and Verna relied on emergency housing, charity handouts, and crime.
She was a dominant personality, and I think it fluctuated between her and Roger as to which was the more dominant. But she was in it lock, stock, and barrel in all of these cases.
On the night of June 19, 1978, the couple broke into a pawn shop in the small town of Purcell. Among their loot was a Taurus .38 revolver. While staying in the Holiday Motel in Tulsa, they were joined by Roger's brother Harold and concocted a plan to perform another robbery.
Verna came up with the idea of parking along Interstate 35 south of Purcell and put the hood up and her stand out there only by herself as a decoy to get someone to stop in the early morning hours who would not otherwise stop. But here's a woman in distress with the hood up, obviously having car trouble.
In June 1978, Melvin and Linda Lawrence, both service personnel at Kelly Air Force Base, were driving through the night to North Dakota. They were on their way to the funeral of Melvin's mother. Ricky, their 12-year-old son, already a survivor of an open-heart operation a few years earlier, was asleep in the back seat. Normally cautious about stopping to assist late at night, Melvin's sense of duty to assist a lone woman with car trouble prompted him to pull over and offer help. Verna's ploy to lure an unsuspecting victim to rob had worked, but it escalated viciously when Roger and Harold, who'd been hiding behind the car, suddenly emerged. Pointing the gun at Melvin, Roger demanded money before shooting him twice.
His wife, Linda, heard that and came barreling out of the vehicle, running towards Verna, saying, "You shot him, you shot him." And Verna slugged Mrs. Lorenz, and as she was falling back, Roger shoots Linda Lorenz twice. And again, this is all from the perspective of Verna Stafford. It would not surprise me if Verna Stafford shot Mrs. Lorenz. Verna maintains that Roger and Harold began dragging Mr. Lorenz's body toward the woods to get it away from the highway, so when they leave with their truck, people are not going to drive by and see 2 bodies near the roadside, which would alert the authorities. Verna, the truth is not in her. She lies when the truth is better, and all of her lies were to minimize her level of involvement. Because I read recently where she testified at the trial that she could not pull Mrs. Lorenz. Mrs. Lorenz's body was too heavy for her, but she personally told me that she herself pulled Mrs. Lorenz's body toward the woods, and she was heavy, but she pulled her by one arm and her hair.
Roger and his brother Harold jumped into the Lorenz's truck and drove it away.
What Verna tells me is that she is following the stolen truck and she sees movement in the back of the truck, someone in the truck, unknown to them at the time they had shot the parents. And so she began flashing her lights. Bear in mind, we don't have cell phones in the 1970s. And so they pulled over, and she tells Roger and Harold that someone's in the back of the truck. Ricky was in the back, asleep, I am sure, and I'm sure he was awakened by the gunshots and the screaming and all. But the canopy on the back of the truck had a little glass sliding door, window, and the curtains were there and a screen. So Roger put the gun at the screen and possibly punched a hole in it, but shot the boy. You don't bleed if you die instantly. Drainage, seepage, but no blood. The heart's got to be pumping, obviously. And there was a large amount of blood, so Ricky was alive at that time. And we found patent prints. A latent print is invisible. You dust and lift it. A patent print is visible, and it could be in grease or dirt. In this case, it was blood. Bloody fingerprints on the tailgate of the truck. And so they dragged him out of there and dragged him off a distance, and Roger shot him again, and I've got that corroborated not just from Verna. But the sad thing about it is he had to reload. Roger had to reload while that boy is probably still alive. The boy had his hand here, and the round went through his hand and into his chest and killed him.
Investigators had to establish who the bloody handprints on the tailgate belonged to, the killers or the victims. To find out, handprints were taken of Melvin and Linda Lorenz. But Linville, who was not present at the crime scene, later discovered no prints had been taken of young Ricky.
And there's another element to that. I don't know where it would naturally tie in, but I'll tell you at this point. They had failed to take major case prints of Ricky before they buried him. And with all murder victims, you have rolled impressions and palm prints and thumb prints and the entire hand, major case. They didn't do that. They buried him. Well, we had patent prints in blood, but we could not eliminate it as being one of the victims, and therefore could have theoretically been one of the perpetrators. It could have been Roger or Harold's or anyone's blood handling the bloody bodies of the Lorenz or dragging the bloody live person in the form of Ricky out of the truck. And it could theoretically, so we have to eliminate prints. And we eliminated those bloody patent prints as being that of Mr. Lorenz or Mrs. Lorenz, but we did not know as the perpetrator. I get a little choked up when I think about this, but we had to exhume his body, and they amputated both of his hands and shipped them to us, and I've held Ricky's hands in my hands to get the major case prints. But the idea of him clinging on for dear life onto the back of the truck as they're dragging him out, and then they take him out there and reload and shoot him like a dog. It's just, words can't describe it.
The cruelty of the Staffords wouldn't end there. Not only were they driving a stolen vehicle, they were now armed with 2 more guns belonging to Melvin Lorenz, intent on more carnage. Little over 3 weeks later, they struck again in Oklahoma City, On July 16, 1978, the Sirloin Steakhouse became the site of the worst mass murder in Oklahoma's history. It was a Sunday night. 15-year-olds Terry Horst and David Salzman and 17-year-olds Anthony Tu and David Lindsay were getting ready to go home. The assistant manager, 43-year-old Louis Zacharias, was preparing to phone in the takings for the evening to his head office. And cleaning business owner Isaac Freeman was covering for a member of his staff. At 10:45 p.m., Roger, Harold, and Verna burst through the restaurant's back door and forced the crew into the cold meat locker at gunpoint. The Staffords had come to steal the takings, but they ended up mercilessly taking the lives of 6 workers. Terry Horst was found hanging on to life, but died at the scene.
Roger had the .357 Magnum, and Verna had the Taurus revolver. And she made the statement to me that she shot the girl because she was thinking of all the girls that Roger had affairs with. And the Taurus had a particularly hard trigger pull, an incredibly hard trigger pull, totally inconsistent with a revolver, double-action revolver. And she had mentioned to me, I think a little bit of Freudian slip at one time, how hard the trigger pull was. So that's not consistent with the devil made me do it with Roger's finger over her finger. So the two crimes were tied into one another. We know the Taurus was a common weapon used in both mass homicides, the Lorenz and the Stockade.
Although the guns linked the murders of the Sirloin Steakhouse and Lorenz family murders, without any witnesses, the police had no leads to pursue. Months passed until the investigators got the break they so desperately needed. Soon after the Lorenz murders, the Staffords had pulled up at Sambo's, a diner in Stillwater. Their agitated behavior and the unusual North Dakota number plates on the blue truck parked outside drew the attention of traveling salesman Ray Taggart. Little did Taggart know that he had spotted the Lorenz's stolen vehicle and had sighted their killers. The police now had people of interest to pursue, and based on Taggart's descriptions, released drawings of the trio. Within hours, they were inundated with more than 200 leads, including one bizarre drunken phone call.
I was on my way home late at night after, and of course, I was interviewed by various news agencies, each one local TV stations, about the composite drawing. So at the end of a very, very long day, I'm driving home, and not only did we only had pagers. We had pagers, and the night clerk named Fred Collins who paged me to call, and I thought it was going to be important. So I pulled over to make a payphone call. So he tells me that a man called, who identified himself as a truck driver, that he had met these two people, the two of the people in the composite drawings, and the woman looks like a woman that he knew as Verna Stafford, and the man looks like a man he had met, the two of them together, as Harold Stafford, at the airport, Will Rogers Airport. And he went on to tell Fred that he had partied, he used the term partied with these guys, and they went to Tulsa, and he's got photographs of them, and so on and so forth. But then he got very emotional and started crying. He said he was really scared for his life and hesitant to be a witness in the matter. So Fred gave him my name and said, well, you need to call Agent Arthur Linville, and he writes it down. Call him in the morning. He'll be back early in the morning. But he never called me back that next morning as he was supposed to.
Although it was one of many leads, police started looking for Harold Stafford. They soon discovered he had died 6 days after the Sirloin Steakhouse shooting in a head-on collision. He'd been riding a motorbike drunk along the freeway and had driven into oncoming traffic. Linville contacted Harold's wife, Mary, to offer his condolences. During the call, Mary revealed that she'd been in Tulsa with Harold, Roger, and Roger's wife, the name of whom was still unknown to the police. So Linville asked her,
by the way, you mentioned that you were there with your husband, Harold, and Roger and his wife and their 3 children. What's his wife's name? Verna. Well, that's the first nanosecond we had a Verna Stafford connected with Harold Stafford. So that solidified that as the people we're looking for.
It was a massive breakthrough for a case that had gone cold. The hunt was on for Verna and Roger Stafford. Linville and his team tracked Verna down in Chicago.
She obviously denied it at first, but then I confronted her with the fact that we have two eyewitnesses. There's another witness that had seen the vehicle who can positively identify all three of them, and I told her where she was seated in which booth at Sambo's, the restaurant, at which time she gave it up. And she was terrified of Stafford. She thought he had mafia connections and was with the mafia himself, which I believe was just totally ludicrous. They're not going to have a loose cannon, some crazy guy like that for them. But she was very, very afraid of him. So she's immediately in the cutting a deal mode. I mean, to cut her losses. We don't need her to convict her. But she needed us, and of course she minimized constantly her role in it, in sworn statements and in testimony. You couldn't believe her.
Verna voluntarily flew back to Oklahoma with Linville, who was keen on flying under the radar of the ever-vigilant media.
She came because she was rightfully afraid of what was about to happen. She's about to be charged with the largest mass murder in the state of Oklahoma. We listed her as Mrs. Arthur Linville on the airplane. I'm telling you, there's a lot of news media attention to this, and I don't know who knew that we were in Chicago. And so she and I spoke all the way back to Oklahoma. She's personable. No one would characterize her. I think she's your next door neighbor. I don't think anyone would characterize her as a murderess or as cold-hearted as that. To talk about how detached she is, when they decided to drive the truck back from Stillwater to Oklahoma City to exchange it and leave it at the airport and get back into Blue, the vehicle, she got in the back of that truck and slept. Harold and Roger driving it to Oklahoma City from Stillwater. She's in the back of the truck full of blood, the blood of Ricky Lorenz.
A nationwide manhunt was now underway for Roger Stafford. He was brought into custody by the Chicago Police Department before being handed over to the Oklahoma investigation team, who had chartered a plane to bring him back.
When he came out handcuffed, he had a hood over his head. And my thought is guillotine. I mean, it's just crazy. I thought it's so bizarre. And in fact, I worried about the optics of it. You got camera crews watching him get on, but it was his choice to put the hood completely over his head. It was just a picnic on the way back. He jokes about wanting a drink, but he's just talking like a magpie all the way back. You would have thought we had not arrested him or arrested him for jaywalking. He just didn't act like he had a care in the world.
Linville confronted Roger about the truck driver's call.
He said, "Hey, Art, I'm the truck driver. That's me." And I said, "I beg your pardon?" So he goes on to say, and he describes to a T. He said, "Yeah, I called the guy who was named Fred, and he told me I was supposed to call Arthur Linville the next morning." And said, "I was crying and I was upset, and I told him I met these people, and it was him that made the call." Now, the question begs to be asked, of course, is why would he call in and drop a dime on himself? But there were several reasons for that. When I talked to him about it in subsequent interviews, he was just as drunk as a skunk. He said, "I was drunk out of my mind." And he said, "I saw the composite." And he told me he wanted to find the woman who killed his brother. And to extrapolate from that, the only reason he's not going to congratulate her. He blames the woman for the head-on collision of the drunk brother Harold's motorcycle accident. And so he was on his way to Tulsa, but he was in Oklahoma City, stayed the night in Oklahoma City, got drunk, and fortuitously enough, on that night, he sees these composite drawings, so he makes the call. Now, Harold's dead, not coming back. He's not going to hurt Harold. And he didn't name himself, but he named Verna. Here's the irony. We later learned, and I have the receipt where he was staying, my hand of the Bible, he was staying at the Continental Inn Hotel where I was in the lobby of making the phone call.
Initially, Roger remained upbeat, denying the murders and confident he'd be released.
He characterized himself to me as a con artist, and it was towards the objective of saying, why would I kill someone? That's not my MO, I'm a con artist. But the two are not mutually exclusive. Money is money, and that's the motive, and that's why he did it, except there was no need to kill any of these people. And here's the thing, he could have gone out and sold drugs and made more money than he got for killing 9 people. A grand total of $2,100, $2,200 among them. So that's why I think he killed people, because it's a power trip. He wanted to kill people, and whatever made him do that, I don't know. But I don't think the motive was money. It might have been a side benefit to him having the thrill, a thrill killing, as you say, of killing people. Just that ultimate power, if you will.
Eventually, the weight of the evidence against Roger began to dawn on him.
And in a later conversation, he said, well, is Verna for me or against me? And I testified to this effect at the Sirloin Stockade trial. And I said, well, she's totally cooperative and has laid out everything, and everything that you've done, she's going to be a witness. But she can't testify against me as my wife, can she? I said, well, the Attorney General's office in the state of Oklahoma says she can, because it wasn't privileged communication between you and Verna in the privacy of your home. She's wearing 2 hats. She's your wife, but she's also an eyewitness. And that's an exception to the privilege between husband and wife. And his answer to that, his response was, man, all I can see is the gas chamber.
Roger's prediction wasn't far off the mark. Roger Dale Stafford stood trial for the Sirloin Steakhouse murders during September and October 1979, in which his wife Verna testified against him. Although the trial lasted more than 8 weeks, the jury took a mere 27 minutes to find him guilty, and just 1 hour to sentence him to death for 6 counts of first-degree murder. A second trial found Stafford guilty of the murders of the Lawrence family, where he was sentenced to death again. Verna Stafford was found guilty of 2 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to 10 years in jail.
Now she, by her own statement, shot and killed Terry Horst at the Stockade and was deeply involved. It's her idea to put the hood up and all that. And while we needed to give her some credit, life imprisonment as opposed to the death penalty would be apropos.
9 years later, Verna returned to court for resentencing.
I testified at the resentencing hearing, and at the Sirloin Stockade case and the Lorenz family case, we did not have victim impact testimony. It had not come to Oklahoma for whatever reason. But at the resentencing hearing, I listened to 9 family members, each tell about their loved one. And one of the little boys, 17-year-old kid at the Stockade case, working to buy his first car. And Roger is quoted as referring to everyone at the Stockade as suckers, or they wouldn't be working there. And it was a very emotional thing.
Expecting a reprieve, the judge sentenced Verna to a further 2 life terms.
He said, Miss Stafford, there's an old saying that sometimes you shouldn't wish for something for fear that you might actually get it. And you've asked this court to re-sentence you in this case, which was the largest and the most heinous mass murder in the annals of Oklahoma history. And this is before the Murrah building. But he said, and you know, we've had more people murdered at the post office, Edmond post office, as many as 20 or 21 on a killing by a postal employee there. But that was the act of a deranged mind. This is, you did this for money, and it was a biblical quote as to silver. And he said, if there is assuming there's a heaven and a hell, There is no doubt in my mind that the hottest corner of hell is waiting for you as we speak when you die. In a perfect world, she should have been executed as well. The only credit she should be given was that she did go ahead and turn state's evidence against her husband, but she did that to save her own self, and she succeeded in doing that as it applies to the death penalty.
Roger Dale Stafford was 43 years old when he was executed on July 1st, 1995, at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. Defiant to the end, he grinned as he was administered the lethal injection, until he gasped the words, "Oh God."
But he was a coward. He was a big man with a gun in his hand, shooting kids. And I think of homicide as not just the single act of firing of the weapon or stabbing or whatever, but it's the epitome of grand larceny. They're stealing the remaining years of these people's lives, and how many weddings and how many anniversaries and birthdays and just having children and going to college. 400 years of living. If we were told we had a certain amount of time to live, we had incurable cancer, it would be good news if we had another 3 months, another month, another week, another day. And these people stole 400 years of people's lives.